Bradford Bulls is an issue we've talked about on air plenty of times in the past 6 years or so. Good and bad. Sadly, mainly bad, Andrew. What are your feelings this minute? Obviously, we're in a COVID world, so everything has been thrown up in the air about where the Bradford Bulls are as a club.
So my feelings are that, COVID, coronavirus, in effect, has stopped us finding out what would have happened had things played out normally. So we didn't get to see what the average attendance would have been at Dewsbury. We didn't get to see how the playing season would have turned out, and I think it's actually provided a bit of cover to the powers that be at Odsall / Dewsbury, and also created quite a lot amongst the supporters. Well, they'd say, well, there's a pandemic. Obviously, no one could predict that. Let's give the current owners the benefit of the doubt. The problem we've got is that the current owners, who they are, that's still left pretty mysterious. We've got this situation where Eric Perez is still nominally the chairman. We've got the chairman of Dewsbury as the acting CEO. So the current chairman of Dewsbury is the acting CEO of Bradford Bulls. And I think sometimes we need to step away and look at that bold statement of fact. The acting CEO of Bradford Bulls is the chairman of Dewsbury, who play in the same league as Bradford Bulls. This is a ludicrous situation. And regardless of coronavirus or COVID, it shouldn't be happening. And it's been brought to a head, from my point of view, by now. Bradford Bulls have sent out an email asking fans to consider, in effect, donating the refund that they were owed on their season tickets, because obviously the games haven't taken place, to the club, which I think, would, in normal circumstances, be a totally fair thing to do. Of course, this is a much bigger thing that no rugby league club's got control of. However, in the case of Bradford Bulls, where we've got a history of the club having asked for donations that they need to survive, and it's not a good history, and all it seems, when fans have come up with those funds, it hasn't resulted in the club going on to bigger and better things. It's resulted in the club circling the drain hole. When Bradford Bulls first mooted this, July the 1st, said, look, we're going to be looking at things, we're going to be communicating with fans. They said they would hold a fan forum. Now, that hasn't happened yet. They've said that I've been in communication with Mark Sawyer. He said, well, we discussed the idea of an online forum, but decided not to. And I said, well, why? Obviously a face-to-face forum would be difficult with coronavirus restrictions. Why not an online forum? No response. And that fits with, past behaviour with the club, that they seem to prefer communicating with individual fans. They seem to want to communicate off the record and with plausible deniability, and they seem really reluctant to be straight and open and open themselves up to the scrutiny that we know that they need.
As you say, in fairness, every club is asking their supporters at the moment for money back, and whether people agree with that or not, and people being tagged as loyal. I'm not a fan of this loyalty tag. Yeah. I think if people can't afford and need the money back, then they shouldn't be classed as disloyal or whatever. But I'm guessing from your point of view from Bradford, it's the fact that the fans have so many times in the past few years been asked to dig to save the Bulls, as we've heard, and nothing seems to change. That's where your frustration is coming from on this one. Well,
the situation since last October, where the supposed change of ownership was announced, where Perez was announced as chairman, Nigel Wood was announced as a minority shareholder, but only he made a written statement at the time. And since then, it's now 10 months later, and he's made no public statement that I'm aware of to fans. When journalists have interviewed him, he's made it clear that Bradford Bulls is, not up for discussion. He will not discuss it. I asked, so supposedly Bradford Bulls were going to be more transparent, open themselves up to more scrutiny with this new ownership. So they set up the Ask the Bulls service where you could email the club and they would publish your question and their answer. And I asked them, did Nigel Wood, as is heavily rumoured, have involvement with the club prior to October 2019, i.e. in the Chalmers era that was so disastrous? Was Nigel Wood involved in the club at any point? And their response was, thanks for your email. As I hope you can appreciate, we assumed ownership of the club on October 22nd, and accordingly, we're limiting responses to questions as to the here and now and future plans. That was our intention in launching the Ask the Bulls initiative. We can only repeat our earlier response. We can confirm that Mr. Wood has been a minority shareholder in the holding company since October 2019. No inference beyond this, either positive or negative, is intended beyond that fact. So I take that as a refusal to confirm or deny. They don't want to be nailed down. They don't want to deny that Nigel was involved before October, and they certainly don't want to confirm it. Now, let's just go back through what happened under Chalmers. We had a fresh slate. So all the old debts were gone. And within 3 years, despite the fact that we had the cup run with Leeds and Halifax, which was a total windfall, we sold Ollie Wilson to Huddersfield, so that's 100 grand. But within 3 years, we went from fresh start to back in special measures. And now you've got this club that should be, I used to be a drum beating Bradford fan, sort of swaggering and bragging about attendances and what have you. I'm a bit more humble now, humbled by events, but it should be, Rugby League can't afford to lose clubs like Bradford, and we've now got them playing to crowds of around 2,000 outside the city of Bradford for the first time since 1863. This is a disastrous situation, and fans who are saying, right, we've got to give the new owners the benefit of the doubt. Well, if they aren't new owners, if it's the same people who were involved previously, just minus Chalmers, then where does the doubt to give them the benefit come from? It's not been a fresh start. It's not been the transparency that they promised, and I totally sympathise with fans who say, no, I don't want to even worry about it. I just want to support the club, and they're happy to donate their money, and that's fine. I understand that, but I personally want to make sure that as many people as possible are making that decision with all the information, all the facts, as opposed to just the facts that the current Bradford Bulls setup want them to have.
I think this is the mystery, isn't it? It's how a club who were so successful, you mentioned attendance as obviously winning trophies and whatever, can go from that to not even playing in the city, as you say, playing a few miles down the road in a completely different postcode area, having had failed takeover after failed takeover, a clean slate which has been a waste of time. How can that happen? And almost how can that be allowed to happen?
And one thing I would say is that you look, I was thinking about it, you look at Wigan and Leeds and St Helens and Hull and Warrington, and they've all had these close shaves with near death, I would say. Wigan at the start of the Super League era, having to knock down Central Park. I mean, Leeds, if Yorkshire Cricket had moved out to Wakefield. St Helens, I think, is really pertinent because in the end, St Helens had a new ground built for them by Tesco, and Bradford had a deal set up for that, and then that was called in. They ended up going back to Odsal, taking on the responsibility for the upkeep of Odsal, and that was, that was really the start of the problem. But how is it allowed to happen? I honestly thinking, I'm not quite sure what happened. I've been talking to a few people about what happened to the RLSA. As I never heard that it disbanded, but I don't know what happened. But we had that situation where the anger about it was clearly growing about the Bradford situation, and then Ralph Rimmer said we're not having an independent inquiry, and then that was it. And there isn't, what's the mechanism? What's the means? Who is marking Ralph's homework? Ralph says, well, we've got an independent board, and they had a look at what we did with the Bradford situation. They looked at, the fact that we purchased Odsal, which, given that, it seems every time the RFL release their figures, Odsal has gone down in valuation again. And doesn't seem to be any plan to, preserve it for Rugby League heritage, as was the stated aim at the time. There doesn't seem to be any means for supporters to go beyond, doing what I'm doing now, which is, having a moan on the internet. And it makes me think maybe, if people like myself probably do need to think about, right, how do we get organised, and how do we make sure that that there is a voice for people. I notice, as we're sat here talking, the Toronto Wolfpack players, that seems coordinated, that they've been tweeting out, like, has the RFL forgotten us? They're trying to make themselves heard, and I guess that's got to be a thing that Rugby League fans consider. If you're not happy with how things are being currently run, then we need to think about, well, what are we going to do to change it? And so, first steps, I probably need to, I need to go further and say, right, what did happen to the RLSA, and what are the next steps in that direction, in order that Ralph isn't just marking his own homework, and there's a bit of pressure on him to keep, to communicate with fans, and to make sure that that situations like Bradford Bulls don't occur again.
George Clark, our colleague at Forty20 magazine, wrote that epic forensic analysis of the Bulls in the Christmas issue, the annual last year. And you mentioned independent inquiries. My frustration has been clear on the programme for a long time, is we have this group of MPs in Parliament, the All-Party Parliamentary Rugby League Group, or whatever they're called.
Yes. And
my frustration is, I'm not actually sure what they do. Maybe I should actually go and ask them. But when it comes to issues like this, where there's obviously been a constant pattern of failure at a club who has been so successful recently, why aren't they pushing for an investigation? Why aren't they trying to actually do something rather than just be a talking shop, I guess?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think one of the local difficulties with Bradford is that, so now I don't know if you've picked up a copy of the Bradford Telegraph and Argus recently, but you don't even need to read it. You just feel it. It's not the paper that it was. Their coverage of Bradford Bulls is now just basically, pretty much everything I've seen is just copy and paste from the club. So again, there's not a mechanism for pressure on the local council or the MPs to act on it. I guess, some time ago, with regards to Odsal, the decision's been made. Look, it's going in the two box. and actually, you know, as it sits there and deteriorates every month, it gets harder and harder for people like myself who think it's absolutely tragic. You know, is there a ground like Odsal, football or rugby league, left in the country with the great swathe of open terracing? You know, that's going to be a tragedy for the country. If we, you know, that is one of the great working class pursuits of the 20th century, standing on those great wide terraces. You know, they had them in Plymouth, and they had them in Glasgow, and they had them in Manchester. You know, they'd had them in every town and city across the country. And as far as I can make out, there's only one left, and that's Odsal, and it's being left to crumble. And like you say, you know, that's why we've got politicians who are meant to be looking after these things. And as it stands, there doesn't seem to be an appetite amongst them for looking at this closely. I think you got a bit of a sign of where we stand with the loan. So we've got our £16 million loan, and it was trumpeted as, you know, Ralph hits the jackpot, and then the Arts come in and get their £1.59 billion loan. So almost 100 times as much, and half of it was pure grant. And it just feels like we, you know, it's that rugby league inferiority complex again. Anything we get, any crumbs from the table, we're just ridiculously grateful for. When in fact, you know, this is a fantastic sport, and it deserves respect, and it deserves proper support, and it deserves proper scrutiny from media, from politicians, and the people in charge can't just treat it like their personal fiefdom.
Obviously, as you say, the season is, well, I wouldn't say ended early, but obviously Bradford are coming back in the autumn trophy thing. We'll talk about that in a moment. I actually saw them on the field at Wakefield in the Challenge Cup, played really well. We're unlucky not to win. You've obviously got a great coach in John Keir, a good young squad. But I guess what happens on the field is almost secondary, because it's all about securing the future of the club going forward. And is there much of a future playing at Dewsbury every week?
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, we've seen, you know, obviously, so that Wakefield near result was very encouraging. The problem that fans like myself have got is that, you know, obviously we had the most encouraging result since, you know, in the bad times, since we entered the bad place. And obviously beating Leeds in the Challenge Cup last year was fantastic, and then, you know, and possibly actually detracted from the push for the playoffs. But then that team got broken up and sold en masse to Hull KR, and so the club is basically asking us to say, take them on trust. Look, you know, those were the before times. That was Chalmers, and now it's a new era, and you can trust that these, you know, this team will hang about and will be given the chance to you know, build back to Super League. The message is still the same. Oh, you know, like, trust us. We're going in the same direction. You know, John Keir, he'll have the support, and we'll keep this squad together. We've heard it, and we've heard it so many times. So we can enjoy, you know, still a fan, still enjoy. You know, I was gutted when Wakefield just got over the line in that game. Or still, you know, 100% support for the lads on the field. But there's that sick feeling in the bottom of your stomach that any time that one of these young lads does well for Bradford, he's increasing his chances of being flogged off to someone in Super League.
Yeah, for many and various reasons, that was the tie I didn't want to be drawn out of the hat. We talked about playing at Dewsbury. Obviously, we don't know how that would have gone because of the pandemic. Do you think? Obviously, the boutique stadium was a Chalmers phrase, which obviously we all saw through as nonsense at the time, or some of us did. You mentioned Odsal. You mentioned the fact that it's crumbling. You know, I can't say anything about that, can I? When I support a team who also plays at an old stadium, which takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to keep in match-worthy condition. Can you see the Bulls returning to Odsal anytime soon, or We hear about sharing with Bradford Park Avenue. As I understand, they play at a much smaller venue.
Yeah.
Bradford City almost seems too big. It's always a problem when you leave home and you don't have control of your destiny. And we see this in the Championship with the likes of Oldham, the likes of Swinton, who have been nomadic over the years to an extent. It becomes harder to find a home and put those roots down.
I would say I take a little bit of solace from the experiences of Charlton Athletic and Wimbledon, but it was a long time that they were both in exile, and on top of that, so Charlton actually stood. There was a Charlton party that actually stood against local councillors and cost them their seats, which was very vitriolic. And I remember reading in a fanzine compilation about these Charlton fans were accused of being Tories, and were having to show their Labour membership cards back at the people that they'd kicked out. So it was a hard road back for them, and I don't think any Bradford fan should think it will be easy. You're right. Valley Parade there were problems with Valley Parade even when Bradford were at a stage where they could nearly fill it. We're miles off that now, and it'd be I can't imagine it being fun for anyone, 3,000 people knocking about, in fact, or even 5,000 people knocking around in Valley Parade watching Championship Rugby League. It's, I guess it comes back to your point about the politicians, Richard, that there seems to be just this negativity and can't do attitude with Bradford. I don't know if it's inferiority complex born of being next door to Leeds, but it really frustrates me. So my girlfriend's parents live by Colchester, and Colchester, they've knocked down Layer Road and they've got this fantastic new stadium, and you think Colchester's not exactly a sporting hub. Or, I know it's obviously a very historic city, but it's not, there's all the, Wolverhampton is, similarly to Bradford, a city that's seen its ups and downs. But it just seems bizarre to me that Bradford does, almost has such a downer on itself that it doesn't think it can do projects, like such as getting a good stadium for what was one of the, seen as one of the best things about the city. I do see, I live down south, lived in London. Bradford Bulls is still a name. Sometimes people say you need to scrap the Bulls name in order to have a fresh break. I would say, look more at the ownership, keep the name, because the name has, as even down here, even people who don't know anything about rugby league, generally they've heard of Wigan and then Bradford Bulls, and then probably Leeds and Saints. So can we go back to, you just said it's a prerequisite that Bradford Bulls return to Bradford, but I don't see any mechanism, don't see any structure for it. Horsefall, not only is the ground very small, but the accessibility seems to be pretty limited too. It's the sort of thing that Bradford Council should have should have been working on for any point in the last 50 years, but it's always been a case of, well, we've got other priorities, and that that's always going to be the case. So I'm afraid I'm a pessimist on that front, Richard.
It's the same with Wakefield, it's the same with Castleford, and I think fans of clubs like Saints and Warrington forget that they were almost lucky that they got their new grounds at a time when supermarkets and retail developments were being built and they wanted land. And Wakefield and Castleford have been unlucky in that sense. Wakefield, there's other reasons as well, which go into politics, which are disgraceful as well. Bradford as well. You mentioned the Tesco development and the fact that fell through. There is a lot of luck involved in these things, but obviously a lot of, I'll say bad management, because obviously it's written in black and white. We know what's happened with the Bulls. I wonder if the fear is, and I'm not saying they'll never, the Bradford Bulls will cease to exist, but I always come back to things like Speedway, which was a fairly decent-sized sport.
Yeah.
And it's got smaller and smaller over the years. Obviously, Odsal used to host Speedway.
Yes.
It doesn't anymore.
Yes.
And there's always that fear that not just Bradford, but Rugby League as a sport just drifts into this kind of obscurity.
Yeah. No, I think there's the Betamax problem, isn't there? That, you know, I'm not an expert on videotape technology, but it seems a lot of people think that Betamax was actually superior to VHS, but that didn't result in, you know, Betamax winning out in the same way. Again, from living down south, you know, another crying shame. You know, another thing I think needs paying attention to is London Broncos and the fact that despite having their best season, you know, in memory last year, might have got relegated, but you know, what a fantastic ride. And yet this year their average attendance is 885. Now that's despite I know that there is a ton of people who watch rugby league on Sky, who enjoy it, who recognise, you know, even if they're Union fans or football fans primarily, see the merits of rugby league and would like to be more involved. And we've got a massive you know, built-in benefit that we're cheap. You know, it's not 50 quid to go watch a game of rugby league. But like you say, without that vision, I mean, that was the thing, wasn't it? London got promoted, and we seemed to treat it as just almost like an embarrassing interlude. Like, let's just wait for them to get relegated, rather than saying, right, there is this, you know, there's one of the biggest conurbations in the world. And we know that we can, you know, Martin Fire is still one of our most recognised players. We know that there are fantastic players to be brought out there. We know that there are spectators and sponsors and potential club owners of the future that we could be getting from London. But there's no, and we've even got David Hughes putting all this money in, but that hasn't actually translated into a strategy that's seen London Rugby League go forward. In fact, London Broncos now are actually getting closer and closer to the level of London Strollers. So yeah, you're right. Again, I don't want to be pessimistic. You know, I'd say most people who know me would say I'm naturally quite an optimistic type of person. But you look at the facts and you look at what's, you know. Here's a fact for you when it comes to rugby league strategy and whether we're going forward. So England played the Kiwis at the Olympic Stadium and got a crowd of, I think, sort of in 40,000. The next year they played Australia, so a bigger draw, and we had Sam Burgess back, so the one rugby league player that everyone's heard of, and there was about 10,000 people less in the ground. Now, how does that happen? And why are the RFL not accountable for that just disaster in terms of failing to, you know, they should have been, bare minimum should have been to you know, like a modest improvement on the previous year's game. But it just seems that they're able, once again, the lack of scrutiny means that, you know, RFL as another balls up. We moan about it online, and then it just, you know, it fades away, and then onto the next balls up. And so if we carry on doing that, I'm afraid, yeah, we will get left behind. You know, it's not just football and rugby union coming to eat our lunch. You know, the NFL want sports fans' money over here. You know, NBA, all these. They're voracious and they're very professional how they go about it, and it makes me think that actually the best hope for rugby league in this country would be for NRL to come in and take things over. And if they did, I imagine that the NRL would be wanting to rectify things in Bradford, you know, amongst other places, sooner rather than later.
I always compare us to ice hockey because I don't think people realise, in a sense, how lucky we are with our media coverage. Yes, it could be a lot better and a lot bigger, but Elite League ice hockey in this country average attendance of 3,000, and that's based on absolutely zero mainstream media coverage. Yes, it's on Free Sport, but very few people watch that channel, which is why when people say Rugby League should be on there, it makes me laugh because they've just got no clue whatsoever.
No.
If other sports can do it, and yes, there are advantages to ice hockey that they play inside, they've got nice arenas and whatever, and I think there's only 2 teams that play in our catchment area, so to speak, in Sheffield and Manchester. But if they can do it without the media coverage that we have, why can't we get people through the gates? Is it just our complete negativity about things? It might just be me. An old boss of mine told a colleague that I'm a very negative person, which was an interesting thing for them to say. I should have told HR about that. But it does seem to be that we have this great product, as you say, and the Betamax comparison was a brilliant one. I'm going to steal that one. That was great. We have this great product, but for some reason, we can't pierce through to anyone outside our bubble.
Well, I thought it was pretty shocking last year that, so I try and do my bit, be evangelical, take people on to Challenge Cup final. I thought it was shocking that the RFL barely seemed to register that it was the first ever Saints Warrington major final, which is an amazing accident of history that they got, 124 years and a couple of Lancashire Cup finals, but that's not, they'd never met in a grand final or a Challenge Cup final, and we didn't really use that. And we just seemed sort of satisfied that it wasn't as disastrous a gate as the previous year Catalans Warrington, which is crazy when rugby union at a club level is not significantly bigger than rugby league, and they have brought in this sort of big match concept, and they have the mechanism. I think they have the tactics and the strategy in place that they can sell out Saracens versus Harlequins, where all that's offered is 2 league points, and we've got Saints versus Warrington for one of the oldest, most recognised trophies that the British sport has to offer, and there's just acres of empty seats. It's, again, I think, a sort of inferiority complex. I honestly think there's too many people working in rugby league who, when they look at those empty seats, think, well, it's rugby league, of course we've got empty seats. When that's selling the game ridiculously short. I just think that there's too much. Again, this, through my limited, so I have done little bits with press work and stuff in over the years, and you hear people, whether it's officials and what have you, talking about the speckies, and it's almost like they're talking about sort of train spotters. It's almost sort of patronising. They almost pity. There's a sense, not everyone who works in rugby league, obviously, but there's too widespread a sort of, well, why would you bother coming to watch rugby league? It's only rugby league. That attitude amongst people who work in rugby league is tragic, but there's too much of it knocking about, and so we've got this situation where what should be one of our biggest assets, should be our equivalent of the Super Bowl, the Challenge Cup final, is, looks threatened. You wouldn't want to put your life on it being at, like at Wembley forever, because it's been allowed to fall away to the extent it has, and it's going to be much harder to build it back up than it would have been to keep it at the level that it was for a long time. I again, I've had quite, I should say there'll probably be quite a few Bulls fans who say, "Oh, this bloke's only speaking for himself." I suspect they will get quite a high proportion of Bulls fans seeing their money and saying, "Oh, this bloke's negative. He just wants to have a moan." Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. If you're able to look at the current state of Bradford and the current state of British Rugby League in general and say, yeah, everything's fine and heading in the right direction, even before coronavirus, that's fine. But to me, looking at the facts in the public domain and looking at the things that where you ask the people who know and they won't give you a straight answer. You know, you talk to mates who aren't interested in rugby, and you say, and they say, hang on a minute. So the guy at your club was the CEO of the RFL when you got your new owner sorted, and he was part of the process that chose this guy, and now he's cleared off within 3 years, having pretty much bust the club, and now that same RFL CEO is minority shareholder, but seems to have pretty more significant involvement than that. They can't believe it, and so I think as rugby league fans, we need to we need to have more self-respect and more, you know, in effect, be more optimistic. This is a brilliant game that people across the country can, you know, potentially enjoy, get a lot out of, and if we have the leadership and the strategy that you talked about that we need, then that can happen. We can have growth in London, we can have growth in the heartlands, we can have places like Coventry coming up, but it's not just going to happen. And I don't think that's the direction of travel at the moment.
We almost, as a sport, and I guess the Bulls as well, going back to someone who was a key part in the Bulls' success in the first place, need a new Peter Deakin type, because obviously he, from a marketing point of view, turned the Bulls around in the early days of Super League, and the sport kind of needs that.
Well, that's it, isn't it?
Different pizzazz.
We need a Peter Deakin, but the last two RFL CEOs have been the people who gave you Halifax Blue Sox and Huddersfield Sheffield Giants. You know, that is their track record, and I don't understand. I genuinely don't understand how anyone can, you know, anytime Ralph Rimmer comes on TV or radio, you listen to him speak and you think you would say he was an unimpressive, like, League One chairman. I don't understand how people can, on the one hand, buy into, you know, Rugby League, TGG, the greatest game of all, and say, oh yeah, and also the person to lead the greatest game of all is this guy. It just doesn't make any sense. And you look at his track record previously, and you look at his track record in post. You look at the Regan Grace thing. That is on him. Like, he is the CEO of the RFL, and for him to allow the first, you know, again, a crown jewel, the Great Britain Lions tour was allowed to go abroad without a clear idea of who was even eligible for selection. And so we had a situation where Regan Grace, you know, we're very lucky given how we've allowed the game. You know, Gareth Keir seems to be doing fantastic work with Wales Rugby League, but he should be better supported than he is. But we've got this, you know, happy accident. We've got a player who has played himself into contention for Great Britain, and so makes the concept make sense rather than just being England in disguise. And we end up with Blake Austin on the wing. He just got this litany of disasters, one after the other. And so again, the direction of travel just seems to be not the way that we want to go. That's the thing that gives me optimism. You know, you got these lads like Regan Grace, like John Bateman going over to the NRL and taking it by storm. You know, the players always seem to dig us out of the hole with what they do and the achievements that they make. But that needs to be part. You know, that we need someone like Peter Deakin off the field, maximising the benefit of that, making sure that every young lad in Wales, every young lad and young woman that now is hearing about Regan Grace and hearing about Amy Hardcastle and hearing about what they could potentially do in rugby league. But it won't just happen, and I think we need fresh people at the top if it is going to happen.
So even Leeds have cannibalised the Bulls women now as well to become successful. It's just that whole Leeds and Bradford thing going on and on and on. As a city, as a rugby team, as whatever, it's always, as you said earlier, in the shadow in a sense. But it's tricky. And coming from another city which is slightly smaller than Bradford, and also in the city of shadow of Leeds, they are an annoying presence in our everyday lives. Just to sum things up, because I see a hot drink has arrived for you. What do you want to happen next for Rugby League and the Bradford Bulls to set them on a more steadier path, shall we say?
Well, I think, first things first, Bradford Bulls should do the fans forum that they said they would do. They should do it online. They've said they'll limit it to season ticket holders, which I can see the rationale for, but I think that's not very fair, particularly when they're playing at Dewsbury. So past season ticket holders won't, for good reasons, might not be season ticket holders this year. And I think that should be the start of the genuine openness that they promised. So if I think Nigel Woods needs to just come out and speak. I don't think that's asking a great deal. I don't know of any other figure in rugby league who's taken the approach that he has in this 10 months. And then maybe we've got at least the start of some sort of basis to move forward. In terms of rugby league, I think I don't think we can beat around the bush. There's no reason to expect Ralph Rimmer to turn into someone who can lead the game forward. And I get all the criticisms of Robert Elston, but would that situation have arisen if we had someone at the RFL who had people's respect and that people thought could lead the game forward? I'm doubtful. But again, I don't know what the mechanism is for that. I think the more I think about it, the more I think I need to be tapping up some of the old cronies from the old days on the message boards who I know were heavily involved with RLSA, and say, well, what was the situation with that, and is it time to be thinking along those lines, some sort of organisation for fans to go. I know that the players are organising, Gareth Carvel and what have you. Maybe the fans need to organise and make sure that they've got more of a seat at the table than they currently do.
Andrew, thank you for your time. There's a perception that I'm anti-Bulls. I'm just anti people and organisations getting away with things time and time again and nothing changing, and that's the issue. I don't know. Hopefully, when everything gets back to normal, whatever that is, the Bulls can flourish again. It's gonna be difficult for everyone though. So we have no idea what's going to happen next. All every club needs is the right hand on the steering wheel to put them in the best positions possible.
Yeah, and it comes down to, I guess, with rugby league being small, it comes down to individuals, doesn't it? So, Wakefield have Carter, and you only need one, but in the end, you're dependent on that one person. I guess Huddersfield have Davey. What happened? That's another thing where you talk about strategy. What is the strategy for Huddersfield or for London once Davey and Hughes? They're not immortal, and there's no reason to think their families will necessarily have the same generosity that they will. So at some point, how do those clubs stand on their own feet? I do think Huddersfield probably have tried to make themselves self-sufficient. I don't think they've managed it. They seem to volunteer pretty often that if it wasn't for Davey, they just have to pack up overnight. And so yeah, I guess it is a big, I've slacked off Ralph, but it is a big difficult problem. That's why you need someone who, you need a group of people at the top perhaps taking more of a sort of NFL style line and saying, right, this is the planning, this is what is going to happen. You know, my personal sort of what if is we should have taken the Wales '95 World Cup semi-final team and just paid Warrington for Davis, paid St Helens for Cunningham, just said, but no, they are going into, you know, they're going to be the Wales franchise. And then we might have 17 Regan Graces and an England-Wales match that was something like our Origin, and a Great Britain team that wasn't just England, and be seen as more of a national, you know, and Wales actually, you know, being retained as a rugby league area in a way that it's stopped being now. But yeah, get me started talk about rugby league, Richard, and you lose the rest of your day. But yeah, I guess I probably did think you were a bit anti-Bulls, but I do think it's separated now. Bull, you know, the Bulls, you know, Bullman isn't doing any of this stuff as far as I know. Do you know what I mean? Like it isn't the personification of the club that's doing it, and that is what I think. That's one of the things that's tough for Bradford fans, is that they've got this sort of history of people like, you know, Joe Phillips and Trevor Foster, who were absolutely archetypical sort of clubmen and decent and honest and look the part and what have you. And now that history is being co-opted by, you know, time, and you know, you got people like Chalmers. I mean, that was one of the really sickening things. Chalmers did a sort of report on Peter Fox's funeral and wake, and he listed sort of players that he'd been talking to. I don't think he got a single spelling of the names right. You just like, you're talking about one of the club's most leading figures, you know, their funeral. You've got to check that stuff. You got, even if you don't know the spellings, you go and you get it checked. And it's just been little, you know, that's like the sort of the canary in the cage to how a lot of things have just been allowed to slide. So yeah, like I said, you know, you get me talking about the 125th anniversary, which I don't know. Again, another thing where, you know, it's a Saturday. So the actual date that Rugby League was founded is Bank Holiday Saturday. So why have we, you know, and obviously it would have been cancelled for coronavirus, so it's a bit, you know, moot. But why didn't we have a big jamboree match on that Saturday at Huddersfield, the birthplace of the game? I don't understand why the people in charge of the game don't care enough to see these opportunities come and really celebrate it. And that's what makes me cynical about them.
We're all cynical. That's the problem. Andrew, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us.
No,
I didn't mention the Autumn Cup, but there's nothing really to mention about it apart from, you know, best of luck with that. You know, a Bradford Dewsbury final will be probably the first and last game of the competition.
It's like something from wrestling. That is Mark Sawyer going to referee it?
You put it
in a black and white private shirt.
Where is the fake Yorkshire Cup? Is it in the trophy cabinet at Dewsbury now that you share the stage?
One of the bleakly funny things about Bradford's situation is we won the Championship Shield. We didn't even win the League One Championship. York did. We won the League One playoff winners. We won the fake Yorkshire Cup, and now we might win the Ralph Rimmer Autumn COVID Cup. So it's the quadruple. It's the worst quadruple that you could potentially. It's just ridiculous. But
I mean, one only hopes now that you've named it, and I will steal that as well. That Derek Beaumont doesn't come in to sponsor this one, and it is indeed the Ralph Rimmer COVID-19 Cup. A fitting tribute to this crazy year.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you all the best, Andrew.
I really appreciate the time to get a chance to get some of that off my chest, and hopefully I get the flack rather than you this time.